stop being the shock absorber. A Zen story on letting go. Right now, there is a heavy static ache locked across your lower back, paired with a constant, dry tightness in your diaphragm that makes your mattress feel like a thin shield, trying to intercept an impending blow. You are likely lying entirely still, yet your core is bracing for impact, hyper-vigilantly monitoring the shifting moods in your household, calculating the emotional temperature of a volatile room, and absorbing the unspoken tension of those around you. It is a profoundly exhausting, silent labor to act as the primary shock absorber for everyone else's chaos, feeling like you are the solitary buffer, preventing your entire immediate environment from structural collapse. You feel a dense, isolated friction, as if you are personally responsible for holding a breaking world together at the expense of your own breath. You are anchoring your muscles against a sudden eruption of anger or grief from someone else, terrified that if you relax your guard for even a single second, the waves will break through and wash everything away. The immediate space around your bed is gently dissolving into a cold, misty northern coastline strewn with dark basalt boulders under a vast, deep indigo night sky. Let your awareness notice the sharp, cleansing scent of sea salt and crushed kelp drifting through the thick stone walls of a low shelter, mingled with the rhythmic, heavy thud of deep ocean rollers breaking far out against the rocks. The surface supporting you offers the immense, unyielding stability of ancient bedrock, a massive foundation that has zero interest in your domestic struggles, your hyper-vigilant scanning, or the emotional tempests you try to intercept for others. Outside the shelter, the great stone structures stand loosely together, completely unaffected by the crashing spray or the howling wind that moves across the sea. Nothing is forcing you to manage someone else's storm or defend your space tonight. The massive shoreline is holding your physical weight entirely in its dense, dry, protected interior. What you are carrying right now is not a sign of failure, and this persistent, anxious hypervigilance does not mean your capacity to love is broken or defective. You have simply been forcing your spirit to act like a rigid, manual breakwater, believing that your right to be safe must be constantly earned by absorbing the impact of everyone else's emotional outbursts. Tonight, we will not force your overthinking mind to be instantly silent, nor will we demand that you magically erase the deep, painful fatigue of being the family anchor. We are here to sit with the simple, unpolished reality of a presence that has nothing to fix, discovering a form of peace that begins precisely when you stop treating another person's chaos as your personal emergency. You do not have to solve your whole life tonight, dear friend. You are safe enough to soften into the dense, grounded mass of this northern shore, because nothing is required of your protection for the next few hours. A surprising insight from Buddhist wisdom points toward an unexpected paradox. The emotional shield you are burning your energy to maintain is actually what amplifies the shock of the wave. Because rigidity always fractures under pressure while loose, grounded weight remains untouched. The mind constructs this frantic role of the protector to guard against the discomfort of unpredictability, ignoring the truth that our core nature is as spacious and unshakable as the coastline itself. The suffering you carry is not the fact that the ocean is wild, but the heavy, tightening resistance you bring to its movements, trying to stand perfectly stiff against a tide that was meant to wash past you. True equanimity is not a cold turning away from those you love, but recognizing that you can remain perfectly solid and dry inside your own structure, letting the waves spend their force against your outer face without letting them dissolve your underlying foundation. If it feels right, take a slow breath, letting that sharp, salt-trimmed air sink straight down into the diaphragm where the habit of bracing against an impact always seems to lock first. You do not need to smooth over an argument, anticipate an outburst, or manufacture a fresh strategy to keep the peace before the sun rises tomorrow. Right now, your only assignment is to notice that you have arrived at a very solid, protected ledge, a place where your current physical existence is completely valid, without needing to save anyone else from their own internal weather. Let the muscle across your lower back release, allowing the posture of chronic vigilance you have worn all day to flatten out completely against the support beneath you, letting go of the tension required to hold a collapsing ceiling in place. You have spent so many hours acting as a barrier that you may have forgotten the immense, grounding luxury of simply being a 3-ton block of granite. Maybe you have felt this too, that sharp spike of internal guilt when you think about dropping your emotional defenses, as if choosing to stop absorbing someone else's stress means you are abandoning them or inviting immediate disaster. We condition ourselves to believe that our hypervigilance is a form of devotion, a way to buffer those we care about so they never have to feel the full weight of their own storms. But if it feels right, notice that fear of letting go without immediately letting it dictate your physical posture. The thought that claims everything will shatter if you stop managing the room is just a spray of foam hitting the outer rock. It has no power to shake the massive, ancient bedrock of your current body unless you try to catch the water. You can see the domestic anxiety, name it as a temporary wave, and still allow your skeleton to sink heavily into the dark earth. In a short while, we will travel down to the edge of the rocky shore to look at how an old shore guardian handles a gray granite cobble that sits loosely inside a salt-crusted iron mesh cage, absorbing the ocean's thud without cracking. But before we open that story, allow your physical frame to become acquainted with the concept of absolute unyielding presence. Imagine the deep interior of a massive coastal breakwater at midnight. It does not look out at the incoming rollers with panic, nor does it apologize to the tide for the spray that breaks across its head. It simply holds its position in the dark, allowing its immense mass to remain cool, dense, and dry within its own quiet structure, entirely unmoved by the fact that the sea is churning in the gale. You have been treating your awareness like a fragile wooden wall, trying to brace your spirit so that every emotional blow from the outside is absorbed by your own tissue, creating an internal strain that leaves your present self cold, fragmented, and shivering under the weight of an impossible task. You have weaponized your current relationships against the reality of your human limits, running your mind through endless contingency plans that only serve to bruise your tired spirit. It is time to let the mind stop checking the horizon for the next storm, to allow yourself to experience the profound dignity of being exactly as separate as you are. There is a quiet, monumental bravery in allowing your perspective to be this grounded, this unaligned with the volatility of others, and this beautifully protected from the chaotic speed of the house, without adding the extra weight of your self-criticism. You are not giving up on your love. You are simply pausing the frantic, impossible work of trying to be the barrier that holds back the sea. As you lie here, listen to the cadence of this voice as if it were the steady, low thud of massive ocean swells settling under their own immense weight in the quiet coastal dark. There are no expectations placed upon your capacity to restore harmony to your environment, or your ability to fix another person's temper in this hour. You do not need to figure out how to navigate a tense conversation tomorrow, or how to shield those around you from their own sharp edges. Let these words pass through your tired mind like a cool evening fog rolling over the basalt rocks, leaving the central foundation completely undisturbed. Every obligation to buffer the world can wait on the lower roads. The chaotic moods of others are safe within the vast ocean of their own path, and your anxious bracing cannot force them into stillness tonight. Give yourself permission to be completely dry and contained for the remainder of this night, as we begin to step down the long pathway toward the heavy shore, along the cold, salt-sprayed perimeter of the northern shoreline. Where the gray mist hung low over piles of dark basalt rock, a young villager named Jiro walked with an invisible, crushing weight locked tightly across his shoulders. His home in the fishing settlement was a place of constant, unpredictable storms, dominated by the volatile, explosive temper of an elder relative whose moods shifted like a sudden winter gale. Jiro had spent his youth learning to read the tiniest variations in the household air, acting as a manual shield to protect his younger siblings from the impact of those outbursts. He had turned himself into a rigid human barrier, stepping between the anger and the vulnerable, trying to catch every sharp word and absorb every emotional blow into his own body before it could shatter the peace of the cottage. This continuous labor had left Jiro with a dry, static tightness in his diaphragm that never truly dissolved, a perpetual state of bracing that made his very bones feel brittle and thin. Even when he escaped to the isolated coastline at twilight, his mind refused to stand down from its watch. His thoughts ran in frantic circles, replaying the harsh arguments of the morning, scanning the horizon for the next inevitable conflict, and auditing his own words to see if he had somehow failed to buffer the family from a crisis. He treated the emotional volatility of his household as his own personal defect, a structural emergency that he was personally obligated to prevent, believing with absolute certainty that if his vigilance faltered for even a single second, everything he loved would be permanently destroyed. The only structure on this isolated stretch of coast was a low, thick-walled stone shelter where an old, weather-beaten shore guardian named Master Kenzo spent his years maintaining the coastal markers. Master Kenzo was a man who possessed the dense, unhurried presence of the bedrock itself, his skin toughened by decades of salt spray, and his coarse woolen robes retaining the sharp, mineral scent of dried kelp and cold iron oil. He spent his evenings sitting on the earthen floor of his hut, completely indifferent to the heavy ocean rollers thudding against the outer wall or the howling wind that rattled the heavy timber door. His attention was always deeply anchored in the immediate physics of the shoreline, his large, calloused hands resting quietly on his knees, while a single tallow wick cast slow, long-tailed shadows across the dark interior. One freezing evening, as a heavy northern gale began to push the winter tide high up into the rocks, the ocean rose with an aggressive rhythmic roar, throwing massive waves of gray water directly against the base of the cliffs. Jiro stood outside the shelter, his muscles shaking with exhaustion, his hands clenched into tight fists as he watched the foam explode across the shore. In his mind, a fresh domestic crisis from that afternoon was raging like the sea, and his body was instinctively reacting to the noise, bracing his core as if he could physically stop the water from advancing, trying to hold back the weight of the entire ocean through the sheer force of his own rigid posture. His breath was shallow and fast, a thin rasping in his throat that offered his lungs no real nourishment. Master Kenzo stepped out from the low doorway of the shelter, his heavy boots making a slow, scraping sound against the wet gravel. He did not offer a philosophical speech about family duty or tell Jiro to stop worrying. He simply walked down to a large iron mesh cage, a Gagabian built right where the highest rollers hit the shore. Inside this heavy wire frame sat a single, smooth, saltwater-worn gray granite cobble, surrounded by dozens of other loose stones of the exact same weight. The old guardian reached into the open top of the mesh, lifted the heavy granite cobble with both hands, and placed it directly into Jiro's trembling palms. The stone was cold, slick with salt mist, and immensely heavy, its surface covered in tiny pits and rough barnacle scars that bit into the young man's skin. Jiro's arms instantly strained under the mass, his lower back locking as he tried to hold the granite block perfectly still, keeping his muscles stiff so the rock wouldn't move an inch in his hands. He stood there on the wet shore, a rigid statue fighting the weight, his teeth clenched as the salt spray coated his face. Master Kenzo reached out and gently tapped the iron cage, causing the other loose stones inside to shift with a deep, hollow clatter. "Look at how these stones survive the winter rollers," Jiro, Master Kenzo said softly, his voice low and dense, completely cutting through the roar of the surf. "You are destroying your own frame because you believe a true guardian must stand like a solid, unyielding wall against the sea. You spend your days freezing your core, trying to catch every wave and hold it perfectly still so it cannot touch the shore behind you. But look at how the cobble rests inside the cage." Jiro looked down at the heavy gray stone in his hands, his muscles burning with the effort of keeping it motionless, his breath locked in his chest. "This granite does not fight the ocean by remaining perfectly stiff," the old guardian whispered, pointing to the cage where the incoming wave was just beginning to crash through the iron wires. "When the heavy thud of the roller hits this barrier, the stones do not resist the impact with a rigid spine. They shift minutely against one another, sliding a fraction of an inch in the dark, distributing the force of the water through their collective weight. They let the sea wash completely through them, remaining loose, heavy, and wet, yet their foundation never collapses because they do not try to stop the movement of the tide. You are a stone, Jiro, not the wall. Why do you spend your nights trying to absorb the entire ocean into your own marrow? The young man stood perfectly still. For a long moment, the roar of the surf echoing through his ears, while the immense weight of the granite cobble pressed down through his arms into his legs. A sudden, deep recognition flooded his awareness, as if a rusted lock inside his diaphragm had finally snapped open under the pressure of the truth. He realized that the anger in his household was like the wild northern sea, a massive, impersonal movement of energy that he could never hope to hold still through his own internal rigidity. He slowly lowered his arms, letting the heavy gray stone slide out of his hands and return to its loose, comfortable position inside the iron mesh cage, where it settled with a deep, solid thud among its peers. As the stone left his grip, Jiro let out a long, shuddering breath that he had been holding since his childhood, his lower back flattening out into a state of heavy, unbraced stability. The waves were still crashing against the coast. The wind was still howling through the willow grass, and the volatile environment of his home remained waiting for him on the upper road. But the internal posture of the manual shield had completely dissolved. He leaned his back against the thick stone wall of Master Kenzo's shelter, allowing his weight to drop straight down into the ancient bedrock beneath his feet, recognizing that his true strength lay not in his ability to stop the storm, but in his capacity to let the water wash past his outer face while his interior remained dry, dense, and solid in the dark. This heavy granite cobble resting loosely inside its iron cage is not telling us to stop feeling, nor is it asking us to become cold, frozen, and numb like a dead piece of driftwood wedged tightly into a dark coastal crevice. It is not suggesting that you should walk through your volatile household with an artificial, forced detachment, or that you should pretend that the sudden slam of a door or the rising pitch of an angry voice doesn't cause a sharp, contracting knot right in the center of your diaphragm. It is showing us something much quieter, a gentle shift in our internal alignment that happens entirely within the way your awareness holds its own unpolished edges. The real suffering Jiro carried was not the simple fact that the winter gale blew across the northern coastline, or that the ocean waves thudded heavily against the cliffs. The true agony lived in the way his mind held those passing storms, treating the emotional unpredictability of his home as an emergency that he was personally obligated to suppress through constant, exhausting vigilance. When we look into our own Latinite reflections, we can see that we maintain this exact same exhausting pattern of emotional shielding whenever we step into the presence of those we love. In our modern emotional language, attachment is that frantic, desperate craving that says, I must control the emotional temperature of this room. I must anticipate every potential outburst, and I must force my body to absorb the shock of their mood before I am allowed to feel safe. Because if their anger breaks through, it means my entire protection has failed. We believe that by hyper-vigilantly bracing our lower back and diaphragm, we are building a shield against disaster. But fracturing your own attention to watch for the next storm from the outside is not a form of love. It is a quiet, continuous violence against your own spirit, turning your natural empathy into a high-stakes defensive posture that leaves you shivering in the dark long after the household has finally gone to sleep. This is how we add a second wound to the first. The first wound is what life presents to us naturally, the reality of a chaotic domestic environment. The sudden spike of adrenaline when an argument flares up, the genuine discomfort of a volatile partner or relative, or the instinctive fear that belongs to a sensitive heart trying to navigate a minefield. This first wound is like the cold ocean roller hitting the outer face of the coastal breakwater. It is spontaneous, unchosen, and a reflection of the unpolished friction that belongs to living with changing, suffering human beings. The second wound is the one we give ourselves when we sit in the dark and condemn our own frame for failing to keep the peace. It is the internal loop that claims we are fundamentally lacking because we cannot preserve an immaculate atmosphere. The heavy self-judgment that turns another person's emotional storm into a permanent verdict of our own failure as a protector. True mindfulness, when translated into the language of emotional healing, is simply the capacity to stand back as the dense coastal bedrock, rather than trying to manually catch and throw back every wave with your bare hands. It is the ability to lie here in the quiet and see the thought that says, I am responsible for their anger, Or if I let down my guard, everything will break, without accepting that thought as an absolute truth or a solid object. When you observe the movement of your hypervigilance without immediately jumping into the storm to absorb it, a tiny pocket of fluid space opens up behind your ribcage. You begin to realize that you are the vast, heavy, unmoving shoreline that safely contains the noise. You are not the temporary shape of the foam caused by the impact. The external tempest might rage, but your internal structural collapse is entirely optional. Impermanence is often misinterpreted as a cold reminder that everything we build will eventually be eroded and washed away by the tide. But for a person who carries the chronic exhaustion of emotional shielding, it is a deeply comforting truth. It means that the intense emotional tightness you feel right now, the sharpest edge of the bracing, the panic of an impending conflict, and the heavy fog of self-monitoring is not a permanent modification of your consciousness. The state of domestic exposure you are endlessly replaying is not a static reality that will remain frozen forever. It is a moving roller that belongs to a single afternoon, already dissolving into the wider sea of your history. When we deeply absorb this, we stop demanding that our surroundings remain perfectly calm like a stagnant pond, and we allow our spirit to be what it is tonight, a dense, heavy structure that has survived the impacts of the day and returned to its own native darkness. Compassion is the immense grounded courage to meet your own unpolished fatigue without turning it into a reason to feel guilty. It is looking at your own aching lower back, your quiet exhaustion, or your desperate need to retreat into an empty room, and recognizing that your nature has done its best to keep everyone safe, even when it was using the heavy armor of hypervigilance to do so. Compassion allows you to lay down the exhausting labor of structural buffering, not because you have stopped caring about your family, but because you realize that freezing your own core to catch their blows will never give their actual suffering a genuine anchor. You are revealing a different kind of strength, one that does not depend on an artificial wall. Letting go, in this cold, rock-strewn landscape of the spirit, does not mean you abandon your responsibilities or that you become indifferent to the pain of those around you. It means you release the extra struggle of demanding that the ocean remain flat before you allow your skeleton to relax. It means expanding your awareness so wide that the passing outbursts of others or your own moments of fatigue become just small, temporary splashes of salt spray hitting a vast, majestic cliffside. You are the entire northern shore, not just the tiny scratch on the outer stone. The dark bedrock can hold the cold gravel, the iron cages, and the shifting rollers without losing its fundamental, massive density. By allowing your frame to settle into the support beneath you right now, you are pausing the war with your own limitations, discovering a monumental self-belonging that survives precisely because it has stopped asking a wild sea to treat it gently. As you listen to the cadence of this voice, let the concepts of control and protection begin to slide away into the deep indigo shadows of the coast. There are no voices shouting in this room, no volatile tempests to manage, and no emotional strategies to complete before the dawn. The raw granite of your character is already fully anchored in the ancient foundation of your own life, and its deep, honest mass does not require a single drop of harmony from the outside world to maintain its structural integrity. You have carried the heavy shield for long enough, watched for the next wave for long enough, and braced your own natural empathy for long enough. The deep shore has accepted your actual weight, and it is holding your presence with an absolute, unconditional tenderness that asks for nothing but your willingness to rest. If it feels right, let your attention drift quietly away from the churning foam of the upper roads, gathering around the heavy, unmoving reality of your physical frame resting right here in the darkness. There is absolutely no need to adjust your posture, to correct the alignment of your limbs, or to force your breath into an artificial rhythm. Perhaps, you might simply notice how the cool, sal-trimmed air of the northern shore moves across your skin, light and unconcerned, entering your lungs and leaving them entirely on its own accord. Even noticing this single, quiet expansion is enough to begin stepping down from the stage of emotional shielding. Your body is already sustaining its vital warmth without your deliberate management. You can safely resign from the position of tracking the household weather. and become the silent witness to this natural, rising tide of resting weight. With the next few exhalations, you might allow a deep wave of softening to settle through your upper shoulders, across your jaw, and down into the tight muscles of your diaphragm. Imagine your physical frame becoming completely wide and flat, like the deep bed of ancient bedrock, settling into the edge of the coast under the weight of an indigo night. If you notice a tightening in your lower back or a slight tremor in your chest, where the vigilance of buffering always seems to lock first, there is no need to fight it or try to push it away. There is no requirement to maintain an immaculate atmosphere, to fix another person's temper, or to prove your loyalty through an immediate sacrifice in this room. You are fully permitted to let your skeleton spread out against the solid support beneath you, becoming as heavy and unhurried as the dark gravel that has nowhere else it needs to travel tonight. As you drop deeper into this structural stillness, a sharp thought will almost certainly surface, attempting to pull you back into the old posture of tracking and adjusting your energy for an audience. It might be an anxious memory of an argument from this afternoon, a worry about how a relative looked at you during a meal, or a silent projection about a future gathering where you feel you must act as a human wall. When this happens, there is no need to punish yourself for overthinking. Instead of engaging with that mental friction, you might gently give this internal pattern a simple name, whispering it silently within your own awareness. You could say to yourself, bracing for impact, or perhaps building the wall. By naming the pattern, you step off the path of the struggle. You are no longer the shield trying to stop the wave, but the deep shoreline observing the tide from a safe distance in the dim twilight. Now, if the image feels comfortable, visualize that specific domestic worry or that deep sense of responsibility as a single smooth, saltwater-worn gray granite cobble, rough, dense, and immensely heavy, resting heavily in your open palms. Feel the cool, slick texture of the salt mist on its surface, recognizing how much vital energy you have spent, trying to hold this massive weight perfectly still before you allow yourself to be safe. You do not have to force the stone to disappear or pretend your arms do not feel tired. Instead, picture yourself letting the slate-gray cobble slide harmlessly out of your grip, letting it drop away from your fingers until it settles onto its loose, comfortable position inside the iron mesh cage in the cold depth of your own awareness. As you leave the stone there, let the image change in your mind's eye. Watch the evening mist roll over the basalt rocks, bringing with it a vast, cool dampness that slowly wraps the willow grass in shadow. Instead of seeing your exhaustion as a failure, watch the dark waves crash through the wire mesh, washing completely through the loose barrier without breaking a single stone. The gray cobbles don't move with a rigid spine. As the heavy thud of the winter roller hits them, they don't strain to reach the eyes of the people in the cottage above. The cool salt water settles straight around the grain, leaving the rocks entirely undisturbed, because the mind has stopped trying to travel down the path of manual protection. The weight of another person's mood or your own fear of chaos is no longer being supported by your trembling tissue. It has been integrated into the massive, fluid permanence of the coast, which is fully capable of sustaining its own tempests without your constant anxiety. There is no need to force a sudden sense of perfect calm or a dramatic emotional healing right now. True transformation within the inner field does not happen like a sudden flash. It is a slow, structural settling, like deep barnacle shells becoming completely fused to the granite over many years. Even if your heart still holds a remnant of its daily sensitivity, or if your mind remains somewhat active, you are still practicing the art of absolute, unyielding presence. You can return to this grounding practice whenever you are ready, or you can simply let it dissolve into the background of your awareness. The bedrock is holding your skeletal frame perfectly, requiring no effort from your abdomen or your lower back, and for the next several hours, your absence from the watchtower is fully sanctioned. 3 tides after the gray granite cobble had settled back into its wire cage, the ocean mist thickened into a bitter, sal-trimmed frost that coated the low willow grass along the cliffside. Jiro found himself walking toward the highest ledge of the coast. His stomach tightened into a hard, cold knot that felt entirely unyielding. A deeper, more invasive challenge had arrived in his settlement that morning. The elder relative, whose explosive moods dictated the family's survival, had suffered a severe loss at the fish market, returning to the cottage with a dark, thunderous malice that seemed to vibrate through the thin wooden walls. The familiar, terrifying pressure had immediately descended upon the household, and Jiro had instinctively felt the old, frantic mechanism of hypervigilance ignition within his chest, commanding him to stand in the doorway, to anticipate every curse, and to catch the emotional shrapnel before it could strike his younger siblings. Instead of staying locked inside the small, suffocating room where his presence was being worn down to a thread, Jiro walked out into the freezing twilight, carrying a message for the cliffside stone hut. His body was shaking with the familiar, toxic adrenaline of the shield, his diaphragm so stiffened by the habit of manual protection that each breath felt like a sharp splinter entering his side. He arrived at the small workspace of Sister Nami, a quiet, elderly woman who spent her winters weaving heavy seagrass ropes to anchor the fishing boats against the northern swells. The interior of her shelter was dense and completely dry, smelling sharply of dried kelp, braided fibers, and the clean, metallic trace of cold bronze. She was a person who moved with the absolute structural certainty of a foundation block, her eyes clouding with age but her ears deeply attuned to the rhythmic thud of the rollers against the base of the headland. On a low oak bench near her feet rested a heavy iron plumbline weight, a solid, ungreased cone of dark metal suspended from a thick hemp cord. Sister Nami used this simple tool to test the vertical stability of the stone walls she helped repair, ensuring that despite the continuous hammering vibration of the winter surf, the center of gravity within the structure stayed true to the earth beneath it. As Jiro entered, his face tight and his shoulders braced against the distant sound of shouting from the lower village path, he looked like a timber frame on the verge of splintering. The old habit of his mind was screaming that he had to run back down, that he was committing a profound betrayal by resting for even an hour, and that if he did not manually intercept the anger waiting in the cottage, his family's safety would be permanently erased. The internal friction reached a breaking point when the wind carried the distinct, sharp sound of a wooden bench being overturned in the settlement below, followed by the faint rising pitch of a familiar volatile voice. Jiro's core instantly locked like a vice. He took a step toward the door, his hands clenching his robes, his mind racing through a dozen different strategies to pacify the household. He was treating the distant storm of that relative's suffering as an absolute command to destroy his own internal sanctuary, believing that his worth as a human being was entirely dependent on his capacity to absorb the impact of another person's chaos. He was hyperventilating in the dim space, his awareness completely hijacked by the phantom images of an impending explosion. Sister Nami did not rise from her low stool or offer a single word of spiritual advice. She did not tell him to calm his thoughts or pretend that his family's environment was peaceful. Instead, she slowly reached out, took the heavy iron plumbline weight by its thick hemp cord, and placed the cold metal cone directly into Jiro's trembling palm, letting the cord dangle free between his fingers. "Hold the line, Jiro," she said softly, her voice low and regular, completely unaligned with the howling gale that was rattling the small window pane. "You are trying to act as the roof when you haven't yet found the bedrock. You believe that by running down into the noise, you can freeze the sea, but look at where the iron points." Jiro stood in the center of the stone hut, the metal weight cold and heavy against his skin, his knuckles white as he braced his muscles to hold the line perfectly still. But as the distant noise from the village path faded into the roar of the surf, he chose one small act of discipline. He did not run back to the cottage, and he did not voice a single defensive thought. He simply stood over a crack in the stone floorboards, took one slow, deep breath into his tight diaphragm, and allowed his hand to relax its grip on the cord, letting the heavy iron cone hang completely free under its own massive gravity. The plumbline did not sway with the wind that was screaming outside the thick walls, nor did it vibrate in response to the distant shouting from the path. The heavy iron cone pulled the hemp cord perfectly straight, pointing directly down into the ancient, silent bedrock beneath the shelter floor, entirely indifferent to the salt spray that was coating the outer stone face. The iron didn't try to change the weather. It didn't burn with shame. Because the ocean was loud, it simply aligned itself with the unyielding center of the earth, resting in its own vertical integrity while the tempest spent its force against the headland. A quiet, monumental realization settled into Jiro's heart as he watched the unmoving iron wait. He did not become a magically perfect saint who never felt fear or anxiety again. But a subtle, permanent transformation occurred in the way he related to his own suffering. He saw that the anger in his home was a storm that belonged entirely to the elder relative's own path, a wild, changing wave that Jiro had no power to cure through his own self-destruction. He recognized that by turning his own body into a frantic, rigid shield, he was not stopping the ocean, he was only drowning alongside those he loved. He let his shoulders drop 2 inches, his breath slowing down into a deep, solid cadence, choosing to sit with the uncertainty of the household's mood, without needing to freeze his core to survive it. He returned the iron plumb line to Sister Nami's bench, knowing that tomorrow he would walk back down the path. But he would walk as a loose, heavy stone that lets the sea wash through its frame, fully dry within his own internal structure. When we look directly into the deep, hidden spaces of our internal architecture, we discover that the mind has spent years using the illusion of a manual emotional barrier as its primary mechanism of defense. We construct an entire identity around the notion of being the solitary protector, fixing our thoughts onto a phantom duty and believing that our current worth is tied directly to an immaculate peace that we must somehow secure for everyone around us. When a sudden ripple of domestic tension manifests in our daily life, or when a volatile choice from someone in our household results in a cold coastal wind of conflict, our sense of structural stability collapses. To escape this vulnerability, the ego initiates a punishing routine of internal interrogation, attempting to scold our tired spirit for ever letting down its guard. We replay old arguments, rewrite old reactions under the harsh light of self-blame, operating under the false assumption that if we just refuse to accept our reality, we can force the storm to yield. This deep-seated resistance to our own actual human limits is the exact process that converts a simple state of environmental friction into a profound spiritual exile. Buddhist wisdom illuminates this internal trap by distinguishing between the 2 distinct layers of weight we meet in our journeys through the world. The first pain is simply what the natural world delivers, the reality of an unchosen temperament in those we live with, the unexpected hardness of a specific relational path, the genuine grief of watching a household fracture, or the heavy fatigue that settles into our limbs after years of acting as a constant shock absorber. This first pain is like the sudden thud of a heavy winter roller crashing against the dark basalt rocks. It is loud, unpredicted, and a reflection of the natural laws that govern all changing, unpolished things. We cannot always prevent these waves from occurring, as the ocean of another person's suffering is a vast, wild entity that we do not own and cannot rewrite. The second pain, however, is the intricate architecture of suffering that the mind manually constructs on top of that initial difficulty. It is the panic that labels our current fatigue as an absolute failure, the self-judgment that claims we have no right to exist comfortably if we are not standing as a human wall to catch every blow, and the desperate rehearsal of future conflicts where we imagine ourselves permanently broken because we took a moment to breathe. This second pain is fueled by our desire for external approval, the fear of sitting with the uncertainty of our family's trajectory, and the habit of turning our specific domestic burden into our entire identity. We stop viewing ourselves as a vast, spacious shoreline that happens to contain a difficult, stormy pass, and we begin viewing ourselves as a defective, accidental error that must apologize for every patch of foam it encounters. You do not have to spend your remaining energy feeding this second pain tonight. While you may not be able to clear every bit of volatility from your historical path, or magically erase the consequences of your household's mood, you can absolutely choose to withdraw your fuel from the war with your own history. When you pause the internal battle, you are not engaging in a weak surrender or pretending that your emotional grief does not exist. Instead, you are establishing a completely different relationship with your difficulty. True peace is never found by demanding that your life become an immaculate. untroubled highway that never encounters a sharp curve. Peace is discovered when you realize that your awareness is deep enough to let the unchosen timelines exist outside your windows, without letting them shake the central foundation of your current structure. We often cling to our hypervigilance because we fear that if we stop replaying the error, we will permanently accept a compromised destiny. We treat our actual, unpolished life as an unjust defect, throwing our thoughts against our own boundaries until our internal landscape is completely bruised. But look at what happened to the heavy iron plumbline weight suspended over the cracked floorboards. It did not require a frantic, dangerous lifting of the entire giant to break its monolithic tension. It simply required the hand to stop fighting the mass and align the tool with the natural gravity that was already present in the center. Slowly, the teaching becomes personal as you lie here in the quiet, allowing yourself to see that your current limitations are not a punishment, but an invitation to step down into the absolute structural presence of your own spirit, discovering a form of stability that survives precisely because it has stopped trying to build a bridge over an unlived lifetime. This unyielding northern shore, with its iron mesh cages and heavy plumbines, is not a distant shoreline designed only for old stone huts. It is a vital framework designed to be inhabited tonight, right here on your mattress, and tomorrow when you step back into the high-speed networks of your contemporary existence. We encounter our own cold, distorted waves every single day in the quiet, modern frictions that cause our stomachs to tighten and our diaphragms to grow numb. You practice this when you are lying awake at midnight, staring at the artificial glow of your phone, checking for an elusive text message or a reassuring message, trying to find an immediate anchor to prove that your current life is not a wasted blank. We buy a fragile, fleeting security by constantly scanning social networks to compare our progress against our peers, turning our minds into a frantic calculation that counts our lack of status as a permanent defeat. Think of how often you smile while feeling immensely heavy inside, offering an agreeable, hollow mask of confidence to your family or colleagues because you believe your timeline cannot afford to show its winter. We look at the chaotic speed around us and instantly begin trying to control the outcomes of our relationships, fearing a future where our unpolished talents will leave us stranded behind the world, and feeling a biting guilt the moment we want to simply close our eyes and let go of the shield. We treat our desire for a rest as a luxury that must be carefully purchased through continuous, flawless production, replaying an old personal setback or a failed creative project in the dark until our internal reservoir is completely drained. In all these moments, we are acting exactly like the villager on the wet shore, trying to manually catch and hold back the entire ocean. True peace is not a grand, immaculate palace that you build after securing every possible title or filling every storehouse to the rafters. It is a quality of spacious gravity practiced in the smallest, most ordinary pauses of your afternoon. A single, unhurried breath taken before answering a demanding message or reacting to an old habit of self-censorship is a profound form of spiritual wisdom. It is the exact second you look at a wave of inadequacy and realize that not every frantic thought deserves your absolute obedience, and not every heavy feeling is a command to force yourself to grow out of season. You can care deeply about your future's security and your community without gripping your old expectations so tightly that your current foundation begins to fracture under the strain. You can rest tonight without earning it through endless productivity, trusting that your actual coordinates require no crop to be valid. Tomorrow, when the old pattern whispers that you are nothing without a title, or that your empty hands are a proof of your failure, remember that you have the option to let the container drop true. When an unexpected gap or a period of dormancy appears in your career line, you can choose to sit quietly with that uncertainty, rather than trying to force a frozen field to bloom through sheer force of will. You can allow your physical presence to become heavy, dark, and contained, letting the natural mass of your current reality settle completely across the floorboards of your awareness. The world outside will continue its immense, changing transactions without your constant mental management. And for the remainder of this night, the most compassionate action you can take is to leave the harvest alone, letting the slow, monumental resource of your own center, hold your frame perfectly flat in the dark. The deep, hollow clatter of the granite stones inside the wire cage is completely fading now, drawing your awareness down into the quiet, dry center that remains when all your manual shields have been laid down on the shore. Let your breath become entirely soft, a faint and shallow rhythm that requires no steering, no defensive bracing, and no environmental management. With every slow rise and fall of your chest, imagine your physical frame losing its sharp, vigilant postures, absorbing the dense stillness of this northern coastline. Just as the dark basalt blocks absorb the cool night mist, your hands are sinking heavily into the support beneath you, letting go of their long routine of tightening, flattening out into the deep, unyielding stability of a bedrock foundation that has been waiting for you all along. The seagrass ropes are entirely quiet out there in the dark, their heavy strands resting effortlessly across the oak benches without needing you to stand in the doorway or keep watch over the household air. You can feel the deep, comforting weight of your limbs as they soften, becoming as dense, unhurried, and steady as that solid iron plumbline weight pointing straight down into the center of the earth. The storms of the settlement can continue to roll across the lower roads, shifting and raging through the village, but they cannot disturb the profound structural consolidation that lives at the subterranean root of your being. The heavy salt crust of your protective identity is washing away in the dark, leaving your spirit clean, spacious, and entirely at peace with the unpolished territory of your current rest. There is nothing left to buffer before the sun rises, no family crisis to repair, and no one to save from their own natural journey through the rough winter swells. The mind is no longer guarding the perimeter. It is simply letting the wave wash through, allowing the massive permanence of the shore to hold what you could never change through the force of your own rigidity. Your breath is growing quieter now, a faint whistle of air through the cracks of the thick stone shelter, regular, distant, and perfectly safe. You have returned to your own quiet source, a place where you are permitted to be completely empty of strategies, completely useless to the tempest, and completely supported by the unmoving ground. Let the words dissolve into the cold mist of the room, leaving behind only the deep, heavy sensation of a body that has finally chosen to drop its internal wall. The tide is slow, the basalt is dark, and your eyes can close with an absolute certainty that the bedrock will hold its own structural alignment while you disappear into the shadows of sleep. You are safe enough to stop existing as a shock absorber for the remainder of this night, allowing your consciousness to sink softly through the heavy stone layers into the perfect stillness of the resting earth. When the winter rollers break entirely outside your walls, what is left for the dry iron line to measure? The absolute, unblinking presence of the rocky coast remains entirely undisturbed in the wide darkness, offering a silent, monumental container that has never asked for anything but your willingness to lay down the shield. In this deep and insulated layer of the night, the exhausting mental habits of your waking hours lose their momentum, dissolving one by one into the cool mist that blankets the open gravel paths. You can feel the mattress beneath you as an absolute, uncompromising timber deck, a firm foundation that does not shift, warp, or demand that you brace your core to justify the space you occupy. The long, rigid pathways of your thoughts, which spent the day locked in a state of constant, scanning comparison, are expanding now, softening into the deep, subterranean warmth of this sanctuary like raw seagrass resting beneath a heavy coastal fog. Think of how the ancient, unpainted stones of the breakwater absorb the relentless pull of the winter wind that sweeps through the northern bay. They do not strain to match the speed of the rising water, nor do they complain about the cold, irregular slaps of the foam settling into their dark crevices. They simply remain completely still, allowing the immense weight of the tide to distribute itself naturally across their surface, fully integrated with the laws of gravity and earth. In this quiet hour, your physical frame is permitted to exist in that exact same unbothered state. You do not have to perform. You do not have to fix your environment. And you do not have to trim away a single piece of your natural sensitivity to deserve this shelter. You are fully sanctioned to be as heavy, as separate, and as warm as the blunt iron weight resting on the floorboards of the shore hut. We carry such an immense unnecessary burden when we treat a chaotic household season as a personal failure or a betrayal of our inherent value. We burn our remaining life force replaying our old arguments, searching for the exact moment our protection faltered, operating under the false assumption that if we just monitor our surroundings tightly enough, we can force a silent past to return our reflection. But the old rope weaver reminds us that the unrefined fiber holds its place in the braid, precisely because it remains empty of its own resistance. Your stillness is not a deformity, it is the unique coordinate where your true center of gravity lives, aligned directly with the unmoving core of the mountain, rather than the shifting transactions of the market below. Let the breath become even smaller now. A tiny, almost imperceptible current of warmth that moves like the slowest frost through the open window frame. There is no longer any need to manage the rise and fall of your chest or to watch your thoughts to make sure they are orderly. Everything is moving on its own natural rhythm, a quiet, involuntary pulse that links your physical form to the silent turning of the dark earth. You are no longer the traveler leaning over the wet railing. Nor are you the merchant calculating the weight of the catch. The tools have all been dropped, the heavy plumb blinds have been laid down on the cedar planks, and the night is managing its own immense cycles without a single drop of sweat from your forehead. The small, lingering anxieties that still hover at the edge of your consciousness are nothing more than flakes of dry bark drifting away in the alpine wind, losing their sharp edges and sinking one by one into the shadows of the ravine. You do not need to reach out your fingers to catch them or try to organize them before tomorrow. You can simply watch them pass through the open spaces of your awareness, growing smaller and more distant until they vanish entirely into the silver dark. Your chest is completely wide and unconfined, an empty frame where the cool evening air can pass without meeting a single knot of resistance, carrying away the last remaining scale of your daily labor. You have stayed strong for long enough, carried the heavy wedge for long enough, and fought your own grain for long enough. The earth has accepted your perimeter, and it is holding your foundation with an absolute, unconditional tenderness. Sink further still into the warm, heavy bedrock of your mattress, letting the last faint embers of your wakefulness dissolve into the eternal, steady murmur of the wind beneath the fog. There are no lists to complete before the dawn, no paths to repair, and no unchosen futures to navigate within the theater of your thoughts. The wood is perfectly seasoned, the soil is steady, and the deep quiet has claimed every ounce of your ancient resistance, leaving behind only the pure, unhurried sensation of a heart that has finally returned to its own unconditioned home. Let yourself be carried down into the deepest, darkest silence of the mountain floor, where the pressure is stable, the night is permanent, and there is absolutely nothing left for you to carry, nothing left for you to defend, and absolutely nothing left for you to solve. The vast, unblinking steps of the coast continue to absorb the cold dampness without moving an inch, fully content to exist within their own boundary of stone and clay, while the vastness of the sky continues its restless change. In this deep layer of the night, your mind is invited to settle into that exact same self-contained validity, leaving behind the exhausting habit of checking the empty fields for a ghost harvest. The heavy, honest weight of your physical frame is pulling you down into an absolute structural rest. You can feel the mattress beneath you as a solid, seasoned timber deck that has completely stopped demanding that you project your energy or overcompensate to satisfy the silence of the world. The long, delicate strands of your awareness, which spent the day stretching toward the horizon to capture approval, are uncoiling now, expanding into the gentle golden warmth of this sanctuary, like raw moss soaking in the quiet dark. Think of how the old coastal wall behaves when the winter storm intensifies and the thick alpine mist begins its long, silent descent over the promontory. The mud ridges do not tilt toward the storm or strain to follow the path of the wind. They simply stand firm on their low bedrock foundation, insulating the center and allowing the pressure to distribute naturally through the steps. The seasoned earth is cool, firm, and completely unbothered, asking the path no questions about its visibility or the number of travelers it has guided through the hills. In this quiet hour, your spirit is permitted to exist in that exact same unaligned state, You do not have to negotiate your value. You do not have to fix the distance in your connections. And you do not have to force a single silent soul to see your worth. You are fully permitted to be as heavy, as quiet, and as complete as the lead weight resting beneath the wood. We carry such a heavy, unnecessary sorrow when we treat an unexpected barrier as a verdict that we are fundamentally lacking or incomplete. We spend our remaining energy replaying our words, searching for the exact moment our devotion failed to hold the trail, operating under the false assumption that if we just fray our own edges tightly enough, we can force a cold horizon to return our reflection. But the old stonemason reminds us that the plumb bob holds the line precisely because it stays heavy in its own nature. Your boundary is not an exile from compassion. It is the unique coordinate where your true center of gravity lives, anchored directly into the unmoving floor of your own awareness rather than the shifting moods of the open sky. Let the breath become even more distant now, a tiny, almost imperceptible current of warmth that moves like the slowest frost through the open window frame. There is no longer any need to manage the rise and fall of your chest or to organize your thoughts to make sure they are pleasing. Everything is moving on its own natural rhythm, a quiet, involuntary pulse that links your physical form to the silent turning of the dark earth. You are no longer the traveler leaning over the wet railing, nor are you the judge presiding over the utility of your own heart. The tools have all been dropped. The heavy mallets have been laid down on the floorboards, and the night is managing its own immense cycles without a single drop of sweat from your forehead. The small, lingering anxieties that still hover at the edge of your consciousness are nothing more than dust particles drifting away in the wind, losing their sharp edges and sinking one by one into the shadows of the ravine. You do not need to reach out your fingers to catch them, or try to organize them before tomorrow. You can simply watch them pass through the open spaces of your awareness, growing smaller and more distant until they vanish entirely into the silver dark. Your chest is completely wide and unconfined, an empty frame where the cool evening air can pass without meeting a single knot of resistance, carrying away the last remaining scale of your daily labor. You have stayed strong for long enough, carried the heavy wedge for long enough, and fought your own grain for long enough. The earth has accepted your perimeter, and it is holding your foundation with an absolute, unconditional tenderness. Sink further still into the warm, heavy bedrock of your mattress, letting the last faint embers of your wakefulness dissolve into the eternal, steady murmur of the wind beneath the fog. There are no lists to complete before the dawn, no paths to repair, and no unchosen futures to navigate within the theater of your thoughts. The iron is perfectly seasoned, the stone is steady, and the deep quiet has claimed every ounce of your ancient resistance, leaving behind only the pure, unhurried sensation of a heart that has finally returned to its own unconditioned home. Let yourself be carried down into the deepest, darkest silence of the mountain floor, where the pressure is stable, the night is permanent, and there is absolutely nothing left for you to carry, nothing left for you to defend, and absolutely nothing left for you to solve. The immense, unmoving mass of the northern shoreline continues to hold its position in the silent dark, a monumental baseline that has never required your constant exhaustion to preserve its place among the rocks. In this late and deeply settled hour of the night, the heavy mental cycles of protection and hyper-vigilance completely lose their momentum, dissolving like thin salt spray into the vast, dark expanse of the open sea. You can feel the mattress beneath you as an absolute, uncompromising shelf of ancient granite, a firm structure that does not shift, bend, or demand that you brace your diaphragm to justify the space you occupy. The long, rigid pathways of your nervous system, which spent the hours of the day wound tightly like a spring to absorb the impact of another person's volatile nature, are uncoiling now, softening into the cool, protective gravity of this coast like deep-sea moss resting beneath the midnight tide. Think of how the heavy gray cobbles inside the wire mesh cages behave when the cold northern wind whips through the basalt formations. They do not strain to flatten the waves, nor do they carry a heavy shame because the ocean refuses to become a calm and static mirror. They simply rest loosely against one another, their dense masses integrated perfectly with the ancient floor of the shore. completely unmoved by the fact that the surf is loud or that the froth is swirling across their outer surfaces. In this quiet room, your physical frame is fully permitted to inhabit that exact same state of unbothered density. You do not have to perform a single act of emotional rescue. You do not have to fix the atmosphere of the house, and you do not have to shave away your natural human sensitivity to deserve this deep, dry shelter. You are completely sanctioned to be as heavy, as quiet, and as beautifully separate as the bedrock itself. We carry such a profound, unnecessary weight when we treat our natural fatigue or our inability to maintain household harmony as an absolute proof of our unworthiness. We burn our remaining vitality replaying old conflicts in the dark, searching for the exact moment our vigilance faltered, operating under the false assumption that if we just monitor our facial expressions and words tightly enough, we can force a turbulent stream to return a peaceful image. But the old shore guardian reminds us that the loose stone survives the winter rollers, precisely because it lets the force of the water wash completely through its frame, without trying to stand as an unyielding wall. Your sensitivity is not a failure, it is the unique coordinate where your actual presence lives, anchored directly into the vastness of your own internal awareness, rather than the temporary storms of those around you. Let the breath become even smaller now, a faint, almost imperceptible current of warmth that moves like the slowest evening mist through the cracks in the stone. There is no longer any need to guide the rise and fall of your chest or to monitor your thoughts to ensure they are prepared for a future emergency. Everything is moving on its own natural rhythm, a quiet, involuntary pulse that links your physical form to the silent turning of the dark earth. You are no longer the manual shield standing between the world and the blow, nor are you the manager presiding over the emotional safety of the room. The tools have all been dropped. The heavy plumb lines have been laid down on the floorboards, and the night is managing its own immense, unpolished cycles without requiring a single drop of sweat from your forehead. The small, lingering worries that still hover at the edge of your mind are nothing more than dust particles drifting away into the coastal fog, losing their sharp edges and sinking one by one into the shadows of the cliffs. You do not need to reach out your fingers to catch them or try to organize them. Before tomorrow, you can simply watch them pass through the open spaces of your awareness, growing smaller and more distant until they vanish entirely into the silver dark. Your chest is completely wide and unconfined, an empty frame where the cool air can pass without meeting a single knot of resistance, carrying away the last remaining scale of your daily labor. You have stayed strong for long enough, carried the heavy brace for long enough, and fought your own empathy. For long enough, the deep shore has accepted your perimeter, and it is holding your foundation with an absolute, unconditional tenderness. Sink further still into the warm, heavy bedrock of your mattress, letting the last faint embers of your wakefulness dissolve into the eternal, steady murmur of the wind beneath the fog. There are no lists to complete before the dawn, no paths to repair, and no emotional strategies to navigate within the theater of your thoughts. The stone is perfectly seasoned, the wire cage is steady, and the deep quiet has claimed every ounce of your ancient resistance, leaving behind only the pure, unhurried sensation of a heart that has finally returned to its own unconditioned home. Let yourself be carried down into the deepest, darkest silence of the shore floor, where the pressure is stable, the night is permanent, and there is absolutely nothing left for you to carry, nothing left for you to defend, and absolutely nothing left for you to solve.